Right, I've just read a bit of this, Plato's Republic, which I'm doing as part of my Substack. Read along, and I want to get some thoughts down, because I know what will happen. I'll get to the end of the book, and then I'll be like, what happened at the beginning again? And I've just read book 3, and I got a lot out of it. I read book 2 a couple of days ago, and I didn't get a great deal out of book 2. I don't know if I was just tired, or if it was particularly difficult, or I don't know. As you were, I've just read book 4, not book 3, which means I read book 3 and didn't get a lot out of it. So, okay, back to the scheduled programme. But I want to go through what I've just read this afternoon, because I made a few notes, I made some underlines, and I related to quite a lot of it. And it made me feel some things, you know. So I'm just going to go through some of the underlines that I've done. Now this is a discussion between Socrates and Adeimantus and Glaucon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these names right. Glaucon. Glaucon. Adeimantus looks fair enough. So they've built a city, basically. And they're using the city as a proxy to help understand human nature, I guess. The idea being that if we can understand how to build a just city, which is obviously much bigger than an individual, we can then take what we learn from that and bring it back to the individual level and understand the individual. So in book 2 they talked about soldiers and how music and physical education or physical training go together to create a well-balanced soldier. So that's something I'd like to come back to, because I didn't really follow it all that well, but they did mention it again in book 3. So let's just go through some of the underlines I've got and see if we can make sense, see if I can make sense of it, having just read it, so it's fresh in my mind. So it kind of makes me think in some ways about what I've learned through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, about acting in accordance with one's values, about acting with honour, about doing the right thing over the easy thing. Those ideas, and that's what's resonating with me here. So the first note I have here that really resonated with me was about wealth and poverty. And I understand about them because, you know, wealth and poverty are something I think about a lot, because I'm in one of them and not in the other. Actually, that's not true. I'm not in poverty. I have a comfortable house and money for groceries and subscriptions to things. So I'm not in poverty as such, but I wouldn't say my life was comfortable. Actually, that's a lie too. It really is comfortable. I'm reading about the Russian Revolution right now as well, so I know what discomfort looks like. Civil war and all that after the revolution. Imagine getting your house taken away from you by the Soviets, or being recruited to go and fight against the Reds or the Whites, depending on where you live. Right, that's discomfort. So I'm comfortable. So I suppose it's all relative, isn't it? Right, wealth and poverty. And it says here that both things, wealth and poverty, make not only for inferior products of a craft, but inferior craftsmen. And then it goes on to say that wealth turns people into lovers of luxury and idleness. Poverty makes them illiberal and bad at what they do. Either makes them look for political change. Right. So if you're in poverty, you're looking for assistance in some way, a social safety net maybe, or, I don't know, a handout of some sort, accommodation being provided for you. And when you see politics favouring the wealthy, makes you angry, makes you lash out, makes you perhaps more politically active. And likewise, if you're wealthy and the government comes in and takes your wealth away, increases your taxes, etc. So, yeah, these two things, wealth and poverty, can lead to a desire for political change for whatever reason. What else did I come up with? Right, it's talking about acting honourably. And I've said in my notes, acting honourably is taught and does not, no, should not be written into law, like encourages like. So, acting honourably teaches those that you are bringing up to act honourably, or those around you, and that seems fair. And if it's written into law, if you're forced to act honourably, then you might not want to. You might want to lash out and act dishonourably. I don't know why, but that's what I'm taking from this. And then it goes on to talk about living your life. In fact, I'll read this out. What you're saying is that such people will be living like sick patients, too lacking in restraint to want to give up a bad regimen. Yes, absolutely. And what a charming way they go on. For all the attention they get from the doctor, they get nowhere, unless it's to make their illness worse and more exotic. And all the time they're hoping some new drug they're recommended will make them healthy again. Yes, he said, that's a good description of what happens to patients like that. So I've put here, yes, now I feel attacked. And yes, feeling that way is not a charming feature of mine, as it goes on to say. Acting with honour equals sobriety. Victimhood versus stoicism. So why is this resonating? Well, I'm diabetic, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I don't act in the proper way all the time. In fact, most of the time, not. So I don't pick up alcohol or drugs now, so that's a big win. Celebrate your wins, right? But I do not exercise enough, and I eat poorly. My diet is quite poor, which is a choice thing. I wish that it were otherwise, but it isn't. But I don't do anything about it. If I do, it doesn't last. And then I complain, say, well, if you had my life, you would eat rubbish too, which is exactly the kind of stuff I used to say when I was drinking alcohol. Because I don't have time, I don't have money, I can't afford to prepare good food, I don't have time to do it. You know, excuse after excuse after excuse. And it was saying here that waiting for some new drug to make them healthy again, and I'm like, yeah, give me some of that Ozempic. Surely now I'm due it. I've actually just submitted bloods for review again, and I'm expecting a medication tweak. Rather than eating healthy and exercising, I'm looking at medication. I know it though. I'm aware of it. That's not always a good thing though. If you're aware of something and yet you're not doing anything about it, what does that say about you? So that's kind of what I'm battling here. So that's why I've written I feel attacked. So it's interesting that these ideas were around as early as Plato. What was that, 400 BC, something like that? So let's move on to my next underline. So it starts to discuss the three different parts of a human, and it talks about the three different parts of a city. And they're not the same. So first of all, we've got an analogy of a colour-fast dye. So it talks about preparing the wool before putting it into the dye. So if you prepare it beforehand and then dye it, the dye will be colour fast, won't wash out. But if you don't prepare the wool first and then you dye it, the dye will come out as soon as you wash it. So preparation. So it's talking about music and physical training for soldiers. So we've mentioned that to prepare them to be steadfast in the face of desires and fears, which equals courage. And that's one of the three things. So the other two, moderateness or moderation, uses those words, moderateness or moderation, and then it goes on to call it moderateness throughout in this translation. And what's the other one? See, this is good because I'm getting it in here. Moderateness, courage and wisdom. Right, the three foundations in the city that lead to justice. And then it goes on to say that if justice comes about as a result of these things, what happens if you take these things away? Does justice remain? So that's a question it's asking. And I think it does. I think justice, it's saying, is the foundation. So these other things come around. They don't cause justice to be born. They actually are born themselves of justice. I hope I've got that right. It seems to me, I said, that what's left in our city after the three things we've looked at, namely moderateness and courage and wisdom, is what makes it possible for all of them to come about in the city and preserves them in existence for so long as it too is present. And what did we say? That if we found the three and took them away, justice would be what was left. So that sounds like I've got that right. Okay, so by now a city appeared to be just insofar as each of the three kinds of natures in it performed its own role. And again, it appeared to be moderate and courageous and wise through these same three kinds being affected or disposed in certain other ways. Right, so now they figured out the three things that go together on the top of justice in a city, and they start to look at the external factors that would do the same thing in a human. So I've written here, getting in one's own way. So it's saying, so what should one say about these people? Isn't it that there's something in their souls telling them to drink, but there's also something in them getting in the way of their drinking, a different something which overpowers the other? So it's talking about reason, appetite, and a third thing, which I'll get to in a minute. So the reason is the head part, the appetite's the heart part. The heart part is the part that needs to be regulated, or it will go and run off and take over. You know, if one indulges one's desires all the time without reason or without limits. It makes me think of Satrap Cosgo, who's a character in Live Ship Traders. See, he's come up in relation to Tsar Nicholas II. So it's funny how these fantasy books seem to tie in with Russian history and with philosophy. I love how that happens. So, yeah, we need reason to temper the desires, the appetite. And it's saying here that if one's thirsty, but one decides not to drink, then one thing is overpowering the other. So I've put getting in one's own way, which is a psychological thing, which I'm aware of because I get in my own way all the time. Whether it be with diet or with content creation or whatever it is, you know, external factors. Reasoning element, the bit, and yeah. Then it won't be unreasonable of us, I said, if we claim the things in question to be twofold and distinct from one another, calling the bit of the soul with which it reasons its reasoning element, and the bit with which it experiences lust or hunger or thirst, or is all aquiver with any of the other appetites, the unreasoning and appetitive element, going with certain ways of being filled up and getting its pleasures. Right, so these things, do they counteract one another? I think no, one thing keeps the other thing in check. I think that's how it goes. Then he goes on to talk about the third thing, which is the spirit. And it says, but now, what about spirit? And the bit of us we get angry with. Will this be a third kind, or will it be the same in nature as one of the other two? Probably, he said, the same in nature as the second of them, the appetitive. So it then goes on to say, no, that's actually not what they're saying. So it says, I've heard this account surely, I said, indicates that anger is sometimes at war with the appetites as one distinct thing with another. Aren't there also many other cases where we see someone cursing himself when his appetites force him to go against his reasoning because he's angry at the bit of him that's forcing him on? So the appetites push you against your reasoning. So this is me going through to the kitchen to get another biscuit after I've already had one. So the appetites are overpowering the reason. And I remember this from when I was in my drinking days. I've shared about this a lot in AA meetings, about that thing where you say, I'm only going out for one, and then you end up with memory loss and not an idea how you got home. So I think addiction comes into this in a big way when it's talking about appetites being insatiable, and the reason takes a back seat for whatever reason and doesn't regulate the appetites in a safe way. Addiction. So you can see why I'm relating to this so well. So it's talking a lot about the reasoning element, and then it goes on to mention again the money-making, soldiering and decision-making that we discussed about cities, and then it talks about corruption. So in the soul, does the spirited element constitute a third, making a natural ally for the reasoning element, unless it's corrupted by a bad upbringing? Now, I haven't had a bad upbringing. My upbringing was actually pretty good, so I don't take that on board personally. But philosophically, it's an interesting idea. If you're raised not to be able to regulate your appetites, then it stands to reason that you'll grow up to be somebody who can't do that. Right. Reason, appetite, spirit. Isn't it, as we said, a mixture of musical and physical training that will bring the soldiers into accord with each other, stretching and nourishing the one with beautiful words and beautiful lessons, and slackening the other by soothing it, taming it with harmony and rhythm. Lovely. Then, when they've been looked after like this and have truly learned and been educated in their proper roles, they will take charge of the appetitive element, which is the most populous element of the soul in each person, and, by its nature, the most insatiable when it comes to money. And they'll watch over it so that it doesn't become big and strong by getting its fill of the so-called pleasures relating to the body, and so cease to perform its own proper role, instead trying to enslave under its rule what it's not fitting for its kind to rule over, and turn the whole of life upside down for everyone. So I've made a wee footnote here saying, so reason and spirit combine to keep appetite in check and allow it to do its job. So of course appetite does have a job, it just tends to run away if left unchecked. And then it goes on to discuss moderateness. We'll call the individual moderate, won't we, because of the friendship and harmony of these very things, when the ruling element and the two that are ruled share the belief that the rational should rule and don't fight like opposing factions against it. So I think we're kind of getting to the end. Yeah, I'm getting to the last couple of pages of this bit. It's actually book 4 I've just read. I think I've been misstating it. Yeah, healthy actions, I imagine, produce health in a body, and all unhealthy ones disease. Yes, well, don't just actions produce justice in a soul? Unjust ones injustice, necessarily. So, I think what it's saying is a thing I learned from The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Act with honour, and honour will aid you. Something that resonated strongly with me. And now I'm getting to read about philosophy and about justice and about injustice, and it's about doing the right thing. It's about not doing the wrong thing. It's about moderateness, moderation. It's about reason and spirit and appetites, desires. It's about putting these three things together, a trinity, if you will, in order to live a good life. So that's what I'm taking from Book 4 of Plato's Republic. I'll be reading Book 5 shortly, and we'll probably do this again because it's helping me immensely to sort my thoughts out, and it makes me read a bit more carefully as well if I'm taking notes. And if I'm doing what I did this afternoon, which is to sit in the car out in the driveway and read with the wind and the rain and the silence inside the car. Yeah, that was a good thing. I enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. See you later.